Hi everyone. I'm going to be sharing a few really great old aerial photos of Stoke Newington. I love aerial photos. They've got so much detail and you can see so many things that you don't normally see in old photos. I've collected a few from the 30s, 40s and beyond, and you really get a sense of what Stoke Newington used to look like before World War II, before a lot of the housing developments that took place in the 40s and afterwards, and also the bomb damage. We're going to look at some photos that were taken just in the aftermath in the kind of early 40s, bomb sites, churches that are long gone, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. We're going to go in a chronological order, so I've got some photos as we're going to see from the very kind of early 20th century, and we're going to work our way up. The first one is a really interesting one of Clissold Park. You can see there's a caption saying it was photographed from an aeroplane. Someone told me once it was a kite, but I thought that was probably going to be sort of too heavy to lift on a very big kite, so let's assume it was an aeroplane. And this is a really great photo because you get a sense of not just Clissold Park, and you've got Clissold House, you've got the New River, but you also see the streets around it, and some of them have changed quite considerably. For example, you can see the east side of Clissold Road, where the school is now, just on the right. Those houses were there. We're going to see them later on in the presentation, but I want to focus on another kind of set of houses that you can also spot in this photo. Okay, if you notice, just on Church Street facing the park, you've got this really charming semi-detached houses. Because I know a lot of those kind of buildings and houses from photos, every time I see an aerial photo, straight away I try and get a sense of whether or not those houses are there and how they looked. This was that. This was Glebe Place. There were 4 houses in total, semi-detached, and they were on the corner of Clissold Road, facing the park. Really nice houses. These were very typical houses to this part of Stoke Newington. The whole stretch from Clissold Road all the way to Green Lanes was called Paradise Row, and it really had these large, in some cases, Georgian houses that were homes to Stoke Newington's most affluent residents. I created a few then and now animations that I'm going to be using in the talk just to illustrate just how the streetscape has changed. And for Glebe Place, I created this one. So you can see this is what the view is today. And if you're struggling to imagine where those houses were, right on the corner, you can see the gate, you had the pillar, and that was the view. Completely changed, and this was a theme that we're going to see across of old houses demolished to make room for a lot of flats, building blocks, housing development. Had a huge impact on the streetscape of Stoke Newington over the years. Here's another view of the park, slightly different angle. Pretty much the same year, I would even imagine the same sort of photo shoot, if you like. I really like this one because you get a very nice view of the old bandstand that was just by Clissold House. You can also see the original New River, and I'm going to talk about that later as well. The bandstand, here's a very nice sort of colored photo. Could be, yeah, I think it's a photo, if not like a half photo, half painting. It was erected in 1894, just slightly after the park opened. This was referred to as the rustic bandstand, and you can pretty much see why. Very charming still. This is another image of it with the girl kind of posing. They would have dances, I believe, every Saturday. So you'd have a band playing, but I think that sort of came maybe sort of further along in the kind of the 50s and early 60s before it was pulled down after it was vandalized and burned down. So that was Clissold Park. We're going to move slightly further north. This is Woodbury Down. Hard to believe. The road bang in the middle, that's Green Lanes, just heading towards Manor House. You've got Finsbury Park on the top left corner, and you've got Seven Sisters Road running along kind of the middle and the right, and that's the West Reservoir. I love this photo because you really get a sense of what Woodbury Down looked like before the estate was built. It was almost semi-rural. You can see very large Victorian villas, semi-detached or detached, with really very spacious back gardens, to say the least. There was also a tennis club on Green Lanes, and they had a few courts there as well. Very picturesque, very much almost echoing kind of the Victorian Stoke Newington. It was thinly populated. It was a fairly sort of small parish in that area. But in the 1930s, there was a lot of effort to create modern housing for people that were moved on from areas that were defined as slum clearance areas. Woodbury Down was designated an area for redevelopment. Compulsory purchase orders were issued for all these large houses, but the building had to be postponed because of the Second World War. And by 1952, this is what it looked like. The Woodbury Down estate, very much held as the estate of the future. 57 housing blocks in total were built in Woodbury Down in Stoke Newington. It had the first purpose-built comprehensive school in London and one of the first ones in the country. It had the first purpose-built NHS health centre as well. So it was very much almost, if you like, a village within Stoke Newington. And this is just 1952. The construction began in 1948, and pretty much most of it finished by 1962. So it ended up looking very, very different from what it did in the 30s, in that original photo. You can still see along Green Lanes some of the kind of the original houses on the other side. But by this point, Woodbury Down was completely changed. The site on the right, that's where the school would go in a few years. This is kind of a view of what it looks like today. The estate has been going through a considerable regeneration. A lot of the old housing blocks have been pulled down and newer ones have been built. This is an ongoing process. It's meant to go on for a number of years. But this gives you a sense of just how Woodbury Down, from the Victorian semi-rural, very kind of well-to-do area, to then becoming an estate, and now again going through a lot of transformation. I think the one thing that is always consistent is the reservoir. So let's sort of move on. We looked at the 30s, Woodbury Down. Moving on, this is a great aerial photo from 1944. There's so much detail, and I guess you can probably spend the whole day just zooming in and looking into every aspect of it. We don't have that much time, so I'm just going to focus on a few things. For me, I think the most dominant feature almost, if you like, are the filter beds. There used to be 9 filter beds in Green Lanes, just opposite the pumping station, not to be confused with the 2 reservoirs. And you can clearly see them in this photo. They really stand out. And this is also a very easy and quick way to kind of locate and orient yourself when you're looking at these kind of photos. This is a view from 1980, really nice one that shows the filter beds, and if you like, the entire waterworks complex, because you've got the filter beds, you've got the 2 reservoirs, you can see the pumping station, you can see the 1936 filtration plant, you get the full view. Some of you might ask, what happened to the filter beds? You know, they look so nice, you could use it for so many things. I'm going to get to the campaign in a second, but the reality was that they were no longer needed by the mid-20th century, I believe. They were originally put there between 1855 and 1883 to purify water as part of the kind of the water purification process. And there were 9 in total. But by the mid-20th century, Thames Water didn't need them anymore, and basically was looking to offload the site, use it for other things, maybe sort of cash in from developers, and so on. And this really kickstarts one of a number of campaigns that Stoke Newington has had in the last sort of few kind of centuries almost. The Save the Reservoirs campaign started in the 80s, concluded sort of mid-90s, and this was a very vocal, persistent, important campaign to save the West Reservoir and the filter beds. There was a whole talk that Monica Blake gave about this campaign a few years ago. Really fascinating story. I don't think that many people know about it, which is a shame. But there was very active attempts to try and save the filter beds, use them for other purposes. Unfortunately, while the campaign was successful in saving the West Reservoir, it wasn't successful in saving the filter beds, and houses were built on the site. This is the view today. If you were kind of looking from, I guess, the castle pumping station. The original railings are still there, by the way, along Green Lanes. And as far as I'm aware, they're listed. So next time you walk up and down Green Lanes and you see those nicely kind of ornate Victorian railings, those were from the original filter beds complex. So staying with this 1944 map, it's quite amazing when you zoom in into the park and you realize it was all allotments. If you look at the original photo, you can see that something looks a bit different. And when you zoom in, you get this beautiful sort of very interesting patterns. And the park, as it was used also in World War I, was used for allotments. Zooming in, this is a really nice view. You see Clissold Park, you can see the bandstand as well, right? You've got the two ponds. The other interesting feature of this particular photo as well is the original course of the New River. So if you look, it actually formed a beautiful horseshoe shape there. Just to highlight it, you can see the original New River entered the park in Green Lanes and then sort of exited in Church Street. And I'm going to talk about that later on. And this was basically the course of the river since 1613 when it opened. But the course of the New River was truncated and shortened. And by 1946, it ended in the East Reservoir. So all this was just standing water. It wasn't needed. Unfortunately, it got sort of truncated in the park more and more. And what we are left with today is technically a pond. It's not connected to the New River itself. And it really kind of captures, if you like, just a small part of that course just in front of the house, a bit along the deer pan as well. But this is not connected to the New River anymore. If you like, it's almost a remnant of what the New River was in Clissold Park. This is a view from 1946, just 2 years after the previous one. This one is quite interesting because we can still see the allotments, but we can also start seeing bomb sites and prefabs as well, like the one bang in the middle at the bottom of Clissold Road. And there's a lot of other interesting details I'm going to be looking into in the next few minutes. I'd like to kind of focus your attention now to this, I guess, sort of feature that looks very odd and peculiar, right? If you're looking at it, it's a sort of rectangular shape. If we zoom in, we can see that it's within a bomb clearance site. And I think for a while I wasn't even sure what that was until one of our sort of returning sort of guest speakers, Nick Hyam, gave a fascinating talk about World War II, bomb damage and sort of redevelopment, and basically kind of solved the mystery in that talk. And I'll get to that in a second. You can see that entire area of kind of Hawksley Road and sort of Sandbrook Road sustained severe damage. You can see that the dark blue basically means that there was nothing to salvage, and that whole area was cleared to build the Hawksley Court estate. And this gives you a sense of what that rectangle was. This was an emergency water supply that you would use to take down fires or anything else that was needed in case the mains weren't working. And you had a few of those dotted around, usually within sort of bomb sites. You can see that all the kind of the rubble was cleared, but those houses that you can see on the left were also cleared, including Lillian Street. That was the street just there in the middle where the car is, disappeared under the new estate. This view is looking from Sandbrook Road, so you can see the spire and kind of really get a sense of where you are now. But this was the view very much in the mid-40s. This is what I mentioned. This is not from the site itself, but just to give you a bit of context, and you might actually see that in other photos if you're looking at other historical photographs. These were the emergency water supplies. This was the view from Albion Road. So same scene, and you can see the kind of, if you like, kind of the emergency water supply just behind the trees, kind of fenced off, right, just before the estate was built. And next up in this fascinating view, I'm going to turn your attention to something that very easy to miss, but I was very curious about it. This is a really interesting spot where you can see where the New River exited Clissold Park under Church Street and then continued towards Aidan Terrace and then sort of Patherton Road. And you can see, I don't know if you kind of have a quick look, there's also quite a large sort of house or a large sort of structure that you can just see in front of the river. That was Kenaway Hall, a very large building. Believe it or not, this was actually built as a private residence, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Today, you would think this could probably be a hotel, but this was, again, on kind of that stretch of Church Street that was called Paradise Row, facing the park. These were kind of the large houses, the really kind of affluent residents, bankers, merchants. Most of them were Quakers at the time as well. This was the scene. This was the view. This is another view of Kenaway Hall, originally called the Willows. So this is looking east. So if you just came from Clissold Crescent and turn right, this would be the view. At the moment, if you think about what's there now, it's basically open space. So where the lamppost is, that's where you basically have the 393 bus stop. And Kenaway Hall Estate is slightly further up. And this lovely building was demolished in 1953. This is the view looking east. So you can just see a bit of Kenaway Hall on the right. You've got the New River, as I said, running along Church Street. You can just see a tiny bit of Paradise Bridge, I believe, on the very kind of bottom left corner. But that's where you could enter the park as well. And that's where the New River went, just under Church Street. And this is the view of Paradise Bridge from Clissold Park. Looks very different now. So just to help you get your bearings, this is the view today. This photo was taken just before the bridge was demolished. And the whole section along Church Street was drained and filled in 10 years later, in 1958. And next feature we're going to look at, hopefully you can kind of look, ideally you have this sort of full screen as well. This is a really interesting one because you look at it and what you have, I mean, I guess the only word you can describe it are the ruins, the carcass of a church that was completely bombed, sustained direct hit, and just this very eerie shadow that you can get a sense of one of the towers and the windows. This was St. Faith's Church in Lonsborough Road, corner of Knebworth Road. And you can see here, again, looking at the bomb damage map, it sustained a direct hit in 1944 and was completely destroyed, as you're going to see in a few photos in a minute. So this was the view. And as you saw in the aerial photo, it had one tower standing, which cast that shadow with all the windows. This is another view. You can see the area was being cleared, the church was being pulled down, and an estate was built on the site. And this is a then and now animation that I created to show what's the view now. Looked very, very different when the church was there. Almost hard to imagine that it was located there, but yeah, I mean, it's quite astonishing when you realize just how much bomb damage has changed the streetscape, and all these grand buildings, in some cases like this one, completely vanished. And looking at this view from 1949, this is Stoke Newington Road cutting across, and this view is looking, if you like, northeast. The one that I'm going to start with is another church. So we looked at St. Faith's. There was also Devonshire Square Church, just on the corner of Walford Road. There's a much smaller church now, but you can see the one that got bombed, right? Again, like with St. Faith's, you can see if you like, almost the remains of that church. A lot of devastation, but luckily this one was built to some extent. This was the view from inside. So very much gives you a sense of the destruction and kind of the impact that the bombing had on this church. Like the others, very grand. This is the view today. This was the view back when. So you had all these large sort of churches, quite a few of them sustained damage. Some did not make it. This church was rebuilt. Then it was rebuilt again, slightly smaller, and now only the section that you can see on the left remains. The next sort of feature just to focus on is this building in the middle. This was the Alexandra Theatre and Opera House, also called the Alexandra Palace, the Alex, the Palace. Had different owners, different names over the years. This was at 65 Stoke Newington Road. You can clearly see that it's quite unusual. There were quite a few cinemas along the kind of the main road. This was one of them. This was the view. As you can see, kind of late Victorian. This was, if you like, almost kind of the sibling of the Hackney Empire. So Stoke Newington had its own Hackney Empire called the Alexandra Theatre. Very grand. You can almost imagine the shows that were on there, later kind of movies as well. Just to give you a sense of how the streetscape has changed over the years. It was derelict, I believe, during the 50s, and in the early 60s it was demolished and a housing block was built on the site called Alexandra Court. So they retained the name to some extent. And that was it. So thank you very much. Hopefully you've gained an appreciation of aerial photos. They might look a bit intimidating at first, but there's so many hidden gems and so many details to dive into and look at. Like I said, this was quite tricky to try and really pick only a few. I'm happy to make all these photos available. So if you're interested to see your street or your house or explore those in more details, do get in touch and I'll happily share them. Thank you very much.